All right, hello. Welcome to the Movie Change Up podcast. Coming to you live from around various places in the United States. My name's Joe Fricke, bringing you the Mount Rushmore edition of our podcast. Uh, I didn't realize I had everyone else muted, so you couldn't hear that Tristan interrupted me earlier, and so y'all just look like we laughed for no reason. But anyways, if you're, watch a lot of sports talk or a lot about that, you kind of have an idea of what the Mount Rushmore is as far as discussion goes. Or if you've seen the Mount Rushmore edition of our podcast, you also kind of know what we're going for. But if you don't really know what people talk about when they're like, oh, this guy belongs on the Mount Rushmore or whatever, basically, to equate it to sports, it's like if you were trying to figure out who to put on the Mount Rushmore for baseball, you might pick, oh, I want this person to represent pitchers, or I want this person to represent batters. I want this person to represent like fielding, and maybe for the fourth option, you might put like a catcher or a coach or something like that. Uh, but yeah, it's not just necessarily the top four. It's kind of the um, various categories you might want to represent, and so that's kind of what we're doing here. And today's episode, like I said, is the Summer Blockbusters. So we wanted to focus on movies that were released between April 1st and August 31st. So if you're wondering, oh, why didn't they say this or why did no one bring up that? You might want to look it up and see when that movie came out because it might not fit the parameters of what we're talking about today. Uh, Johnny, I'll just go around the room and see kind of what everyone's general thoughts are. Was there any categories that were kind of easier to put together or harder to put together?
Yeah, anyone who doesn't know, my name's Johnny Doop. Yeah, as far as ones that were harder to put together, I think unexpected blockbusters and even bombs, I think we'll all be kind of all over the board with. I think those ones will have the least amount of commonality, but I'm interested also to see landmarks, which is the first one we're starting off with, and what everyone kind of what stuck out in their minds, what they consider a landmark maybe, and what maybe appears in multiple films compared to one memorable scene in a single movie. So I'm interested to see those for sure. And the some I think are always obvious choices, and then there's at least one or two people that don't have them on the list. So those are always fun discussions too when that happens.
All right, and Bobby, introduce yourself and same question. Any categories that were hard, any that were easy?
Yeah, as you said, I'm Bobby. I've been on this show quite a bit if you've ever watched. But yeah, I found honestly the bombs because I'm interested in box office. Like a bunch of them stood out right away. There's one that I looked up to make sure, and it came up as like one of the number one bombs of all time. So like, okay, I'll definitely add that. Um, but I feel like franchises, some kind of stuck out right away in my head. But there's a lot of room for people to add as many like as they can think of for that. So I thought some of mine were obvious, but like Johnny said, there's going to be people that don't include, something I think is an obvious choice on the list, and it's always a fun discussion.
All right, and Tristan, same question. And you're muted, so no idea what you're saying.
Blurry and muted.
Unfortunately, I'm having some technical difficulties here on my side. So good thing talking about blockbusters. They have the budget. I don't have the budget here, but I'm excited to talk about bombs. Some of my favorite movies are bombs, so it's hard to make the cuts on that one. So I'm gonna have a fun time talking about that, I'm sure. I'm also really excited for characters. I think what makes a blockbuster character is an interesting question. So I can't wait to hear the discussion on that. I think it'll be kind of all over the place in a few of these categories. So I'm really excited to hear the debate. Not the debate, the calm discussion. We're not fighting on this show.
We fight a little bit.
A little bit.
Usually we'll
Depends.
put the first two on our total. Yeah, so how this show works is we kind of each go around saying what our four picks for the Mount Rushmore are, and then based on what everyone picked, we kind of try to come up with the show's Mount Rushmore. Usually the first two that go on the list are all pretty easy because they're usually on two or three or maybe all of our lists. It's getting that fourth one on there is usually where the debate begins. But our six categories today are, landmarks and blockbusters, unexpected blockbusters, summer blockbusters that didn't turn out to be blockbusters and were in fact bombs, characters in summer blockbusters, actors in summer blockbusters, and finally, summer blockbuster franchises. All right, and I'll get started. And we're kicking this off with landmarks in summer blockbusters. So, if you're wondering why isn't the Statue of Liberty from Planet of the Apes on the list, that's because, like I said earlier, we're covering April 1st to August 31st, and that movie came out in late March. So, something like that you might be like, oh, that's iconic landmark. How's that not on your list? That's why. So, to start off, I have the White House from Independence Day. Like, when we thought of this category to cover for this episode, that was the first one that went in my mind, and I'm like, there's no way this shouldn't make the overall show's list. It should be on everyone's list because I feel like that's one of the more. When you think summer blockbusters, like that image of the aliens blowing up the White House comes to mind. Next, I have one because it's a famous landmark, but its real world version isn't the exact same version in the movie, and I chose the Fox building, which plays the role of Nakatomi Plaza in Die Hard. One of the things I hear about people that move to LA all the time is they're driving through LA and they pass the Fox building and they're like, holy shit, it's the Die Hard building. So I had to go with the Fox building, aka Nakatomi Plaza. For my third real life landmarks in movies, I have the fire station in Ghostbusters. I see, people see it all the time and they don't realize it's a real fire station in New York, so I had to go with that. And then finally, we talked about it for a quick second on the pre-show, and I'm not sure if it'll make the overall list, but for a Mount Rushmore, how could I not choose Mount Rushmore from North by Northwest to go on the Mount Rushmore of summer blockbusters? So those would be my four. We got the White House, the Fox building, the fire station from Ghostbusters, and Mount Rushmore from North by Northwest. So,
All right.
Johnny, what are your four picks?
Joe, we have some commonality on our list, and I'll start with those two first. I think you said everything that needs to be said for the White House and Independence Day. That was the first thing I thought of. That's a very famous scene of that being destroyed. That's actually surprisingly not one that appears in a bunch of other, movies or blockbusters as far as being super memorable, but that scene is so memorable, I think it deserves a spot on there. And I too have, yes, you can say it was before the term blockbuster was coined, but I also have Mount Rushmore at the end of North by Northwest. I know that, came out well before what we consider blockbusters for some categories. That's such an iconic, scene, and it's a real landmark that, everyone remembers seeing in that movie, and it's a Mount Rushmore episode, so I had to include it. And then my other two, I have a variation of Joe's. He chose the library from Ghostbusters. I did choose the Statue of Liberty, but from Ghostbusters 2. Walking around and having the slime while they play the music, walking through New York. I know some people are split on that movie. I love Ghostbusters 2, and I think that scene's super memorable. And while the Statue of Liberty is maybe, it is represented in a lot of other movies like Cloverfield, and as Joe mentioned, Planet of the Apes, but those aren't summer releases. I do think it does deserve a spot, and that was the movie that I could place it in. And then my last one is one not mentioned by Joe, and I don't know if it'll be on anyone else's list, but I think this is a very iconic spot that not a lot of people know the name of, but it's the city of Petra in Jordan, and that is in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where he goes to find the Holy Grail. I think if you look at so many movies that have come out afterwards, they've tried to mimic things that look like that spot at the end of the Last Crusade. If you go through all the Mummy movies, if you play any of the Uncharted games, any basically ancient tomb in a lot of movies that have come out afterwards try to replicate that. And I think that was just so iconic and, a stepping stone for a lot of other movies to kind of try to build off of. So I think that's very memorable. So I went with that. So those are my four.
All right, Bobby, what are your four picks for real life landmarks in summer blockbusters?
So I do have two commonalities, and one definitely is the White House. I don't need to say much more about it. Just the iconic trailer alone of Independence Day puts it on the list. I mean, who doesn't remember that? The other one I have is Mount Rushmore, because we probably all thought of it because of the name of the show, but like you said about North by Northwest, I'm sure it's been featured in other movies, but I figured it kind of has to be on the list. The other one I have one is just because it's been featured in so many films because of where a lot of films shoot, and that is the Hollywood sign. That's been in a million movies, a lot of summer blockbusters. If you want to go like recent ones, you can go back to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but it's been in so many that you can't count at this point. And it's really iconic because of that. The next one is the one that I think has been destroyed the most, from what I could find, by any landmark in films, and
I'm
that's
already writing it down.
The Golden Gate Bridge. It's been in over 24 movies at this point, most of them blockbusters where it does get destroyed. So just for that alone, just because you just watch it get destroyed movie after movie every summer, that's got to be in there. So there's my 4.
All right, blurry face over there. What do you got for us?
And you're muted again.
And you're muted.
The first one I'm going to mention here is the one that's already gotten mentioned, the White House from Independence Day. What a more iconic shot in an action movie, maybe. I mean, I can't name one. And I also wanted to get the Statue of Liberty on my list, but I went with a different movie. I went with X-Men. I think that final fight in the Statue of Liberty is pretty iconic, especially for thinking about like how that movie launched this whole genre, essentially, that took over the entire blockbuster industry afterwards. I think that's kind of an iconic turning point for the blockbuster genre, if there's a genre to it. And then my third one I also followed Bobby's logic. I didn't give a specific movie, but what's more blockbuster Hollywood than the Hollywood sign? I put that as my third one. I think nothing says Hollywood more than a gigantic sign that literally just says the name of where you're at. And I think anytime you see it in a movie, you get like that chill of like, oh, here we go. It's a Hollywood movie, one of those big movies. My last here is from Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. It's the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world. It's the one that Tom Cruise kind of like climbs up in the Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol movie. It was the big gimmick stunt of that movie, I think, and it was the tallest building in the world. So it's a landmark, it's a tourist attraction, and it was in a really great action blockbuster. Those are my 4.
All right, and
Cool.
I'm looking at here, and we do have 4 that are kind of separated out that actually have multiple. We have 4 that are on multiple lists. Everything else is only on one list. I can read them off. If we want to debate and switch them out, we can. But other than that, we can have a quick, easy debate and just go with those 4. And that's the White House from Independence Day. All 4 of us had. The Mount Rushmore from North by Northwest. 3 of us had. And then the Statue of Liberty. 2 of us had. And the Hollywood sign. 2 of us had.
I like those 4.
I like
sounds
that.
nice to me.
Like, I like the Golden Gate Bridge for how many times it's been destroyed, but I feel like that and the Hollywood sign are like kind of similar because the Hollywood sign gets destroyed a bunch too.
Yeah.
And it's featured. So if we're gonna pick one of those, I'd go with that.
Yeah, and I looked at the Golden Gate Bridge, but a lot of the movies that it's featured in, like X-Men: The Last Stand and like Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus, like it's in a bunch of really bad movies, especially when it's being destroyed. You obviously
San
have
Andreas.
Yeah, San Andreas. I mean, I think the most memorable scene, at least for me personally, which is in another movie most people consider bad, is the fight at the end of A View to a Kill between Christopher Walken and Roger Moore. I think that's a very iconic scene. But yeah, I think for the most part, if you want to make a bad movie, feature the Golden Gate Bridge as a prominent plot point. It seems to be the that was the formula.
That was just
there.
Sheer numbers and watching it get destroyed is why that was on there.
Right.
So I'm good leaving it off.
All right, and yeah, so like I said, what makes the summer blockbuster landmark Mount Rushmore? We have the White House from Independence Day, we have Mount Rushmore North by Northwest, the Statue of Liberty from multiple movies, and then the Hollywood sign from multiple movies as well. And so next up we have Unexpected Blockbusters, and Johnny is going to kick that list off.
All right, so I'm going to start off with, I have 5 here, and I'm going to make my final decision when I just get to my 4th. So I think number 1, you got to go Jaws, 1975. It was the first, but it was unexpected. Steven Spielberg was an unknown name. The movie blew up afterwards, but like even going into the filmmaking, I think it was unexpected by the studio. You have the shark that didn't work. They had to do They had to basically change up the script and film, around that, and it ended up being better for it. And then it basically started this trend of the summer blockbusters because of that. So I think that was unexpected at the time, while everyone nowadays obviously thinks of it as the classic one. Um, I would say also, I think I'm going to put it on my list, is 1998, the summer of that.
Godzilla.
Yeah, it's Godzilla. No, there's something about Mary. It made a ton of money. It was a huge comedy, put the Farrelly brothers really on the map, put Ben Stiller on the map. Cameron Diaz, had been in The Mask and stuff, but that movie was huge. And if you look at the impact of what that had on comedies for the next 10 years, and you still see it to today, that was like a huge R-rated, you know, rom-com type of movie, and it made a ton of money. And I don't think anyone really would have expected that from a movie like that coming out. So I think that deserves a spot on the list. And it's kind of a different genre than what you'd expect a lot of summer blockbusters to be. My other one, now I don't think anyone expected this movie to fail, but not one person could have predicted how much money that Jurassic World made. That became the largest opening weekend ever at the time. It's been surpassed obviously since, but it had been over 20 years since the original came out. All of the sequels had been terrible. The movie itself wasn't very good, but it made so much money that I think that's unexpected to me. I wouldn't have expected to be as big of a hit as it was. And then I'm debating on two for my last ones, but I already have a 90s movie, so I'm going to go with 1989's Batman. There was a lot of heat around Michael Keaton being picked as the guy. People were a little confused by Tim Burton being that. You hadn't really seen kind of a dark superhero movie work. And I think that one just blowing up and, making Batman, surpassing him from Superman as like what nowadays is like the number one most popular superhero. I think that had a lot to do with it. And, again, like you didn't have all the superhero movies then coming out, that you do today. And I don't think anyone expected Batman to be as big of a hit as it was and still is. So those are my four, and I'll mention my fifth if it's not anyone else's list at the end.
All right, Bobby, what are your four picks for our Mount Rushmore?
Well, I have one of yours at least, and that is Jaws, the very first blockbuster. I think that even just because it's the first, it's unexpected, but it did have a lot of production issues, the shark not working and a million other script issues and all that. I won't repeat Johnny, but from there, I have basically what has become one of the biggest franchises in the world, or if not the biggest, and that is the original Star Wars, now known as Star Wars Episode 4: New Hope. But at the time, it was a crazy idea that everyone did not put a lot of, credence towards that it was going to be any good, that George Lucas could pull this off, this big epic space opera. No one understood it, and it went on to be the biggest film of all time for a long time, and one of the biggest pop cultural hits of all time. I have one on here that I believe Joe is going to have as well, and that's going to be Die Hard. You had a TV actor basically coming into this action role that no one really expected. I think Joe knows more about it, and I have a feeling it's on his list, so I'm going to let him kind of talk more. But it was very unexpected, and it's become like a movie people watch every Christmas. It has one of the best villains of all time, and it spawned an action, one of the best, or one, not best, but one of the longest running action franchises. And then the next one I have is kind of similar, in a similar vein to what Johnny did with There's Something About Mary. I went with My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Came out in 2002. The budget was $5 million and made almost $400 million. It stayed in the top 5 for like the longest that any movie had at that, until like Avatar, I think.
It was Sing that surpassed it. That released when The Force Awakens came out.
Yep, that's the one. So it was a small little, comedy movie that not a lot of people would expect to blow up as it did. It came out in August and played out all throughout August and for the rest of the year and for however long. And it's one of the biggest, low budget hits of all time. So that's what I'm going with.
All right. And
will Tristan be muted? That's the question.
Not this time. All right, I'm good this time.
All right.
So my first unexpected blockbuster is one that came out in 1987. It had a really small budget of $5 million, but it launched a career of Patrick Swayze, and it went from a really low budget
Ooh.
B movie to somehow being a huge hit, and that's Dirty Dancing, a huge low budget movie that has now become like a cult classic and one that had no business making any money. The second is one that's gotten mentioned already, so I'm sure it'll make the cut unless there's a big plot twist, and that's Jaws, the first one that really defined the blockbuster that we know of today. So, of course, it's unexpected, and I mentioned all the highlights of it already, so I won't cover it too much here. My next one is another kind of a bit of a reach because I didn't think of it necessarily as a summer blockbuster, but I looked it up, and this did come out May 9th, 1980, which is a weird choice because the movie is called Friday the 13th. Uh, this movie was made on an extremely low budget, $500,000. It was made as this extremely low budget ripoff of Halloween, and they're like, just get it done, get it out, lowest budget possible, and then of course it made them like millions and millions of dollars, and it's launched a humongous franchise. So I think if you're talking blockbusters, you're talking long-term franchises, you got to give some love to a Halloween movie, a horror movie, and Friday the 13th I think fits that perfectly of a low budget big movie that became like a humongous defining phenomenon that I think people think of as slasher before they even think of Halloween and think of Friday the 13th. In my last one here, I wanted to also throw some love to a comedy, and this is one that came out in 2014 and it could have just been another forgotten kind of stoner comedy, but suddenly the entire world couldn't stop talking about The Interview. So my fourth spot here is The Interview, the Seth Rogen James Franco movie about North Korea, where it got so much attention that it became like a national cry to release The Interview, and people all went and saw it. People who never would have ever saw it purely for the fun, the spectacle of seeing the movie that they shouldn't have seen. So that's my last pick, The Interview.
Netflix
Interesting
movie. Yeah,
choice.
All right.
basically.
All right. So I guess I'll start. For my first one, I'll just say I have Jaws. I think we've talked about Jaws. As far as nothing I can really add to that hasn't been said. For my next one, I have something different that wasn't really on anyone's list, and that is the original Iron Man movie. You basically had a director who hadn't really directed anything since then, or before then, I mean. You had a star that was considered uninsurable, and kind of after, he basically, they considered his career to already be over when he starred in it. They were writing the movie essentially as they were filming it. They didn't have a script, and it was based on a character that in 2008 no one really, gave a shit about, and then it went from that to launching basically the most popular and successful film franchise of all time with the MCU. And without Iron Man, I don't even know what cinema would look like today. So I had to go with Iron Man. For another one, I went with the Blair Witch Project, basically a movie that had the budget of a gum wrapper and a shoestring, and went on to be like a massive phenomenon. But I also put it on the list partially because of, I think it affected the way that films are marketed. I don't know necessarily films and kind of the whole viral marketing campaign. It was like right at the dawn of the internet. I don't know if that's really the same. And I mean, it's still a movie that people talk about today just because of the fact of how little they spent and how much it made and how much of a phenomenon it became. And then finally, for my fourth pick, Bobby was right. I do, in fact, have Die Hard on my list. You had a director. I mean, the director was somewhat successful. I think at that point he had directed Predator before then, John McTiernan. But yeah, you had a star who was known as a sitcom star when all of your other action hero leads were Stallone and Schwarzenegger and these big muscular guys. And Bruce Willis was this sitcom guy who wasn't really muscular. He's kind of an everyman guy. Your villain was completely 100% unknown. No one had any idea who he was. It was based on a book, but they completely ignored the book and did their own thing. When they went into production, they hadn't even finished writing the ending yet. They changed the ending midway through. And then from there, that movie has inspired essentially every action movie since then, where it seems like every single one for like the next 20 years was Die Hard on a plane, Die Hard on a bus, Die Hard on the side of a mountain.
And so, those were just the Die Hard movies.
Exactly. And so those are my four picks: Jaws, Die Hard, Iron Man, and the Blair Witch Project. And now we have an interesting debate because I think Jaws is a lock. All four of us have that.
Yeah.
two of us have Die Hard, and then those are the only ones with multiple. Every single one is just on only one list. So, is there any movie that someone else said that stuck out that you thought, oh, I wish I had thought of that. That should have been on the list.
I mean, yeah, you go
I
ahead
think
first.
one. I think one that Joe mentioned that is a good one is the Blair Witch Project. I think that was something. I mean, that not only I'd put that above Friday the 13th because Friday the 13th didn't start any new trends, but how many found footage movies have we gotten ever since Blair Witch Project was successful? Because you can shoot it for absolutely no money, and every single time you make a profit on it. And I think that's kind of the key to what even Tristan was mentioning with Friday the 13th of it was very low budget and it made a bunch of money. I think that is kind of the unexpected element of that being such a success. That was basically like this viral thing at the time. It was one of the first things you could ever say went viral. And it started this trend of found footage that we're still getting today. So that'd be my argument towards one that wasn't on my list.
Yeah, and I would make an argument for one that wasn't on my list as well, and that's I think it was Bobby that picked Star Wars mainly because of, if you want to talk unexpected, I remember Spielberg had Close Encounters of the Third Kind come out in 1977, and George Lucas had obviously Star Wars come out in 77, and they had a bet of which one would be more successful, and George Lucas thought Close Encounters would be more successful, and Spielberg thought Star Wars would be successful. So its own director wasn't even exactly banking on its success. So that would be my vote to make the list of what we have as Star Wars.
I would vote if we're gonna have a 1970s style blockbuster. Would either have Jaws or Star Wars. I don't really see a reason to put both of those on there. I think they accomplish the same thing. And I'm gonna say that if we're gonna have a horror movie, I would go with Blair Witch Project. I didn't think that was a summer blockbuster, so I didn't go with it. But I think that's much more of the realm of the unexpected blockbuster. You had the viral marketing aspect that is still popular today. You had extreme low budget. They just filmed it on like a shoestring in the forest, that kind of thing. So I vote for Blair Witch.
Yeah, that definitely would be the horror.
I'm just double checking really
horrors,
quick because I'm pretty sure when I looked it up, it was like a May release date.
Yeah, while you check that though, I would say Blair Witch that stood out. If we're gonna pick one between like Star Wars and Jaws, I would go with Jaws because it was the first one. But Star Wars, like it really is. I guess if it wasn't a Mount Rushmore and it was just like a top 10, it's in the top half of that.
Yeah.
But for what it did for movies or whatever, if we're going with 70s, that's fine with me. If we're gonna go with a more modern one, I think Iron Man for starting the Marvel franchise. Basically, it's like it created the biggest franchise that we have running right now that's been going since 2008. So
I'll give one reason that I don't think Iron Man necessarily fits as an unexpected blockbuster because Marvel was really banking on it, like they wanted it to do well. I think that kind of defeats it wasn't unexpected. They needed it to do well. They were putting a lot behind it. It was really marketed heavily.
I remember because when they first because they're talking about doing it forever, like with Tom Cruise and all that, and it was when everyone heard the announcement, everyone was kind of just basically shitting on it the whole time and saying that it's this is going to be terrible. Everyone was just kind of looking forward to the Dark Knight at that point.
I think my argument against Iron Man would be if we're going to go with something that started this huge franchise that no one expected to do well, Star Wars is a better choice than Iron Man. Iron Man it came out after Batman Begins. It came out when Marvel was putting all their eggs in one basket. And if it didn't have that post-credit scene of Samuel Jackson coming in basically saying, we're going to start a team, you could say it's unexpected, but they obviously, at least when they did that scene, they were like, okay, I think this is going to be good and this is going to spawn sequels. And you can say a lot of movies, before that tried to set up sequels that never happened. Look at, mention it, but Godzilla in the 90s and things like that tried to do it. I think we don't have a comedy represented. And I while I like Bobby's pick of My Big Fat Greek Wedding because of how much money it made, I don't think that is in anyone's mind nowadays or 2 years after that movie came out. They made a sequel and it didn't do very well from what I remember. At least it probably made some money, but no one cared about it. But it didn't stay in the zeitgeist of anything. And I think there's something about Mary started this whole Blair Witch Project started this found footage. After There's Something About Mary, it was we need kind of R-rated gross out comedies in that style. And that was kind of the first of its time to really do that. You had rom-coms before, obviously, but you didn't have anything that was, this is R-rated. You have the, sperm in her hair type of scene and
which is
things
still
like
like an
that. Or that's
iconic
a
thing
long
people
game call,
reference
but
today.
I
you
have
have,
one
yeah, and
final
even like
argument.
the zipper in the bathroom. Like there's a lot of stuff in that movie that really stuck with people, and I think even today, over 20 years later, people still talk about that, but no one talks about My Big Fat Greek Wedding. But both of those weren't expected to be huge hits, and they were the number one hits of like their year, basically. I think There's Something About Mary was the number one movie of 1998.
I have an argument to make really quick for Dirty Dancing. I think you talk about something that no one thought would be a hit that people still talk about. Like people love that song still. That song plays at every wedding and every bar, and it's was adapted into a musical that's actively touring. And I think it's still a movie that's in the zeitgeist. People talk about it, and I think also if you want to cover blockbusters, I think you want to cover like this a lead hit single. That was kind of a thing for movies at a time. Like you want to have that big hit single if you're out of your blockbuster. So I think Dirty Dancing covers the comedy. It also covers the big hit single kind of era of music. It launched a career, so I think it covers a lot of the ground that we've been discussing here.
But I think everything that you just said about that movie you can apply to Saturday Night Fever, and that came out before. So I don't necessarily think that Dirty Dancing was the first of its kind to do that as much. I know those were, almost probably 10 years apart or 8 years apart, and Travolta was a bigger star after Grease than Swayze was going into that. But I think you had seen some success in that exact same genre before. And, same thing with the music that's played at weddings, Saturday Night Fever. I hear that song a lot more than anything from Dirty Dancing. So I think that's too similar to me to say it's a super unexpected hit. And it's also not something I ever hear people talk about as like, a surprise, hit or even like a top movie of like the 80s as far as like money being made. I think if you
But
look
it
at,
was though. You can look at the stats and you can see that it was.
if it was, but I never hear that like reference. And I think it was a good pick, but I just don't know if necessarily that had even the same effect on the industry as basically my tiebreaker would be, I don't think it has the same effect on the industry that There's Something About Mary had. My fifth one, by the way, that I didn't mention was The Sixth Sense, but I think Blair Witch Project was a better choice than that, so I'm glad I didn't go with that one. But yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think on those? And is that what we're deciding on? I mean, we threw out Star Wars, but Star Wars and Batman, I think, are similar arguments, and Iron Man are all three very similar.
Yeah.
All right, so my thing was I wanted to go by the numbers. We're talking summer blockbuster. To me, that's a budget thing, to an extent. For if I want a tiebreaker, and my thing was There's Something About Mary. Johnny was wrong. It wasn't the number one that year. It was number 4, and Dirty Dancing was number 16. So for me, just based on that, because I was already kind of leaning There's Something About Mary, and that kind of sealed it. So for me, that's where my vote would go. Is There's Something About Mary?
Do you know what the budget of both were? Do you know what the budget of
Dirty
Dancing
Dancing's budget is
$5 million.
And what was There's Something About Mary? Probably a little more than that.
Yeah,
I'd assume.
just a second. 23. But then you also have to take into account that they were made like 10 years apart too.
Yeah,
so
inflation. So, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, if we put that up to a vote, Bobby, what do you think between those two?
Between those two, I think I would also lean There's Something About Mary, but Dirty Dancing's a really good pick because it does stand out.
Yeah, it's not one I would have thought of. That was a good choice.
So, but I feel like a comedy kind of, a straight up kind of raunchy comedy that spawned a lot of those coming out in that era. Like, I'm good with that. I like Big Fat Greek Wedding for the story, so I'd like a Mount Rushmore thing. But it didn't really stay in the zeitgeist, so that's fine with me.
Yeah.
Because I like There's Something About Mary too. So if we're going between those, but yeah, I would say There's Something About Mary, but I do like the pick.
Yeah, pick was good. So we locked in on those 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
Also, shout out to Tristan with the interview because I forgot that movie even existed. So
and also it was a streaming hit because it was in theaters it made like $6 million because it was on streaming at the same time or whatever. But it was
I wouldn't have thought of like a movie that made a lot of streaming, but that definitely is something else that we see a lot of today, especially today.
Yeah.
All right, so our four movies making our Mount Rushmore of unexpected summer blockbusters. We have Jaws, Die Hard, The Blair Witch Project, and There's Something About Mary. Which I guess then brings us to kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, and that's summer blockbuster bombs. And I think we are starting off with Bobby. So, Bobby, what
Yep.
are your four picks for box office bombs?
So the first pick is one that kind of was like it was talked about in the zeitgeist as one of the biggest bombs of all time for a very long time. Like growing up, I knew this was a big bomb, and that was Waterworld from 1995. The budget just kept going up and up and up on that movie. It came out, it made some money, but because of how much the budget was, it lost a ton of money for the studio. And just more for the legend. I feel like that one because of the story. Like I said, I heard that before I was really paying attention to movies. Was that was a big bomb. The next one I have is the one that literally is one of the biggest bombs of all time, and that is 2002's The Adventures of Pluto Nash with Eddie Murphy. That movie had a budget of 100 million and made 7 million at the box office. It was a disaster and is just a terrible movie, and was kind of in the era of it kind of started Eddie Murphy making some on a streak of pretty bad movies. The next one I have is an iconically bad movie that John Travolta, who we were just talking about, is in, and that is Battlefield Earth from the year 2000. Just a weird, bizarre, crazy movie with a budget of what was it, 73 million and made 29 million at the box office. They marketed it a bunch. It was John Travolta's like passion project for the most part, and just is just a really crazy movie. The last one I have is one that I think a little bit more modern, and I included it because of kind of the reason I feel like it bombed, which was the marketing. So it's kind of the example of what a bad marketing campaign and a name of a movie can do, and that's John Carter from 2012. The budget on that movie also was over 300 million. It was like 306 million because of a lot of kind of behind the scenes issues, and it made well under that. So that's one also for the budget just going insane and crazy to over 300 million, which at the time was unheard of. And I just think the poor name, because it's a space movie, but John Carter is the most boring title that you can give anything. So that's kind of why I included it on the list. But yeah, so
Great first
Waterworld,
name.
John Carter, yeah, Adventures of Pluto Nash, and Battlefield Earth. Those are my four.
Yeah, I think the whole story I've read behind that with the John Carter is, I guess, movies with Mars in the title have a big track record of like bombing at the box office, so they decided not to include Mars in the title. Which
I know,
think
which is
also,
so dumb because that at least makes it sound. You at least know what the movie's about. It sounds like a lawyer film or something, but it's just John Carter, or a coach, Carter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the prequel to Coach Carter. It's the story of how he
Yeah.
became a coach. All right,
Yep.
Tristan, what are your four picks?
I tried to cover four kind of different grounds of what a bomb is, and the first one here is one that was going to launch a whole franchise, and then of course it bombed and not just killed the franchise, but killed one of the biggest studios in Hollywood, and that is, I'll call it Fan Four Stick, the Josh Trank Fantastic Four from 2015. There was tons of money put into this, hundreds of millions of dollars, and then of course the director got fired in a really big explosive way, and they had to reshoot it with a new director, and it looked terrible, it came out terrible, and it bombed so hard that I think 20th Century Fox sold because of this movie. Like I think if this movie worked, they would have launched a franchise, they would have kept X-Men going, they would have been okay, they would have been able to float by. But the fact that this died, it kind of killed all their franchise potential, and then they just kind of gave up, and now Disney bought out Fox purely because of this terrible, bad superhero movie. The second one I wanted to cover here is one of those bombs that has become so bad it's good. It makes no money. It gets trashed. The critics, everyone hates it, but then kind of over the years, it grows and becomes something of a cult favorite. And what embodies that more than The Room from June 2003 came out, made no money. He insisted on running it in New York and LA for award consideration, and it bombed in all the theaters. But of course, that's the cult favorite. That's the midnight movie, The Room. So that's my pick for bomb. My third is one that bombed when it came out, but kind of became a huge, not just a cult hit, but acclaimed, one of the most acclaimed movies of all time, and that is Citizen Kane. It came out in May 1941. It made no money. The studio itself tried to kind of bury it. It had a lot of political press around it, so it didn't make much money. But of course, now you ask any like film professor or film snob, they'll tell you it's the best movie of all time. So I think going from not even being wide release and kind of just flopping to being considered one of the best movies of all time, I think is a climb that is worthy of Mount Rushmore. And this last one here is one that was going to launch a whole genre of video game movies, but instead it nearly collapsed Square Enix, the studio, and nearly killed the entire Final Fantasy brand. It's kind of a personal choice, I guess, but it's Final Fantasy Spirits Within from 2001. It was going to be the movie that launched video game movies, and then it collapsed. It lost $100 million, and Square had to get bought by Enix, or Enix had to get bought by Square, becoming Square Enix, and that's why you have Square Enix now making Final Fantasy, because if they didn't get bought out, the whole company would have collapsed and the whole franchise would have died because of this movie. So that's my pick for my 4 bombs. I got Final Fantasy, The Room, Fantastic Four, and Citizen Kane.
All right. I'll kick off my 4. First one I have is one I was surprised wasn't on anyone's list, and that's Wild Wild West. It was at the time the most it was the highest budgeted movie of all time when it was released. You had Will Smith at the top of his game, working with a director he'd worked with before, working on a kind of somewhat known IP based on a television show, and it came out and it was just garbage and did terrible at the box office. So I had to go with Wild Wild West. Next up, just like Bobby, I went with Battlefield Earth. It's a notoriously terrible movie that made no money. And then for my last 2, I wanted to go in a different direction as far as the bomb. I decided to go with movies that I think are considered good but just failed at the box office. And my first one is Iron Giant, which had a budget of around 50 million and made 30 million at the box office. It was directed by Brad Bird, had Jennifer Aniston and Vin Diesel as voices in the movie. So you would expect, if you look at it now, you would think that movie should be super successful, especially because of how good the story is, and it just did terribly at the box office. And then for my other one, I wanted to go with a comedy, and I chose Pop Star Never Stop Never Stopping, a movie that everyone that saw it really enjoyed it. I think it's kind of gotten more recognition as time goes on, just because more people have discovered it. But it had a budget of 25 million and it made 9 million at the box office. So you'd think with a movie that with a low budget of 25 million, it could at least make its money back, but it still failed at the box office. So those are my picks: Wild Wild West, Battlefield Earth, Iron Giant, and Pop Star. And we lost Tristan. So
Yeah, we lost Tristan, but it's all right for now. We'll see if he gets back.
Who knows? We don't need him for now. He'll be back.
I can hear you. Just can't see it, or you can't see me right now, but I promise I can see you.
That's not creepy. All right.
All right, so this is one I'm debating on 2 again, but I'll start off with my similarities. I have one of the biggest bombs of all time, The Adventures of Pluto Nash. That one is known as one of the biggest bombs of all time that has to be on this list. And I also am surprised that Joe was the first one to mention this. I also have Wild Wild West. I think what both of those cover are The Adventures of Pluto Nash is we're just going to take, Eddie Murphy's a big star. We can do whatever we want with him, and we're going to put out a movie. Wild Wild West was this producer worked on successful movies, and we're going to let him do whatever he wants, and that's John Peters. Those are the big reasons that those movies failed. So I'm going to go with kind of different types of movies for my other 2. One is the most recent pick, and I'm going to go with The Mummy from 2017, because that, I think, is the Mount Rushmore of we're going to start our big universe. We're going to make the Universal Monsters franchise. We're going to put all these in, and instead of focusing on the actual movie, they just added all of these bullshit elements to try to copy what Marvel did in the absolute worst way. And you've seen that happen to DC. You've seen that happen to multiple other franchises, but I think The Mummy from 2017 was the epitome of that. So I think that's kind of the most recent, story of failure based on like today's Hollywood. And I think that's something that we might still see continue unless companies learn their lessons from The Mummy. And if we look at, movies stop trying to set up universes in the first one, we're going to look at The Mummy as the reason that they stopped doing that. And then I was debating on 2. One of my choices that I'm not going to go with because like Waterworld, it basically broke even. It wasn't like a huge, like at a studio, didn't completely lose all its money. Is Evan Almighty from 2007, because I thought that really represented like the let's go huge with the sequel and we'll put all this money into it. And then it basically it made a little under what its budget is. It definitely lost money based on probably, marketing that's not included in the budget, but I didn't end up going with that. I went for a movie that Bobby saw in movie theaters back in 2005. It had a $135 million budget, not including marketing, and it made just under $80 million. The soundtrack was by the band Incubus, and that's all you need to know. It is the movie Stealth from 2005.
I did not see this movie in theaters.
What? I
I've
remember
never
you telling me about it.
I've never seen this movie.
What?
Actually, I've seen it
Okay,
on.
well,
I've seen parts on TV.
I thought I remembered you telling me about seeing it, but never mind.
No.
Anyway, Stealth. It's a terrible movie. It is the epitome of like early 2000s. If you look at like the Hulk and you look at a lot of these really terrible action movies that came out and didn't do well, Stealth is everything that you look for in that. It is the really bad special effects that don't hold up. I think the movie takes place in like 2016 or 2017, and it's supposed to be this future movie. It basically just took, Jamie Foxx is big right now. He just did Ray. Let's throw him in this. And then they kill him off like halfway through the movie. It's so terrible, and it bombed, and it was so forgettable that I think that's what made it a big bomb. It's not something that went on to have success afterwards. It didn't become a cult hit. And for good reason. It was just, that is like the most boneheaded decision by a studio maybe in the history of film, thinking that that was a good idea. And it wasn't one too that like they kept having to do reshoots because the studio didn't do it. Like they were all on board, and this movie was awful and it bombed. So I think that is a fun new, like, I don't think that most bombs, I think, are studios realize halfway through that it's not good. They have to do all these reshoots. They fire directors. They bring people in. This one was, we're going to market this as the biggest movie of the year, and then it just flopped because it sucked so bad. And I think that's a fun little category of bombs. So I have that my list overall then is Adventures of Pluto Nash, Wild Wild West, The Mummy from 2017, and Stealth.
All right, so looking over what everyone has, we have 3 that are on multiple lists. We have Wild Wild West is on 2, Battlefield Earth is on 2, and The Adventures of Pluto Nash are on 2. And I have a nomination for that 4th spot. And for me, I would pick Johnny's pick of the 2017 Mummy, because I do think it kind of is the epitome of that. We're gonna start a franchise before we even have our first movie bomb, which is I think a worthy category of bombs that should be represented. And I think Johnny's pick of the Mummy. If I had thought of the Mummy, I think it would have been on my list, but I didn't think of it, so it's not on my list. I don't know.
I think I want to make a push for The Room. I think we want to cover like the So Bad It's Good bomb, like something that bombs.
But that's
then
not
becomes
a.
a
Is
cult
that
classic.
a bomb?
Yeah.
That
It's
doesn't
not a
have any
financial
budget.
bomb.
Yeah.
Right. Because the like it bombed critically, and it was like, and he tried to push for like Oscars and stuff because Tommy Wiseau was crazy, but it cost.
I feel like he's made money on that movie.
Person. Yeah, exactly. It cost a lot of money for one single person, but in the long run, not a lot of money, and it only was in like a few theaters and stuff. So
Yeah, when I think of like a box office bomb, like that might have come out in the summer, but that's not a blockbuster by any means, and it's not really a bomb financially. It's just
he lost lots of money on it. I mean,
but he's made it all back now. I mean, if not more, he's probably got more money now than when he started with that, based on just that movie alone.
So do we want to cover something that was like a bomb that became good, like a Citizen Kane or something like that? A bomb when it came out, and now, of course, is acclaimed.
I think you'd have to go something a little more recently. I mean, I know we talked about North by Northwest for Summer Blockbuster, but like if you look at, if I personally, and I don't know if this applies to everyone, but if I think of a Summer Blockbuster, usually it is a pretty decent size, like either an adventure film or an action film or something along those lines. And I don't think Citizen Kane really fits that. It's like an Oscar movie that just came out in the wrong time of year. I don't know. I mean, if The Post came out in the summer, I wouldn't say that's a summer blockbuster just because of the release date. Like, it's not a blockbustery type of movie. is
Yeah.
what I think of it, and
Yeah.
it was well before it was even way
Yeah.
before blockbusters existed.
Yeah. Basically, the term blockbuster started for the most part with Jaws. Like
Yeah.
that's why that exists. So I'd say anything after that, especially with financial, like box office wise, that's when
Yeah.
it was really kept track of
Yeah,
as far
I
as
don't
like
I don't
making
know
all the money.
I don't know when like The Shining came out, but if that was a summer movie, I'd say that because it's more of a big movie by
Yeah.
big people, and it kind of bombed at the time, and now people
1980.
recognize it as something
So that
bigger. Yeah,
was
so
Yeah, like
May.
I'd say that
the
is
Blair
maybe
Witch
more
Project isn't
representative.
like this big movie, but it was still like an event water cooler thing that everyone was talking
Yeah.
about.
So was Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
We just weren't alive. Like,
No,
have it,
but just I mean, if we're
all
talking,
right,
because
let's just move
the
on
whole
to the
point
next
is
category then.
money for the most part.
Yeah. All right. So
Next
yeah,
category.
our four Mount Rushmore that we have for box office bombs, we have Wild Wild West, Battlefield Earth, The Adventures of Pluto and Ash, and 2017's The Mummy.
I will say this though, because we didn't really talk about it. I didn't pick Battlefield Earth, even though I came across and thought of it, that was just a passion project by Travolta, and it was this studio that their idea at the time, I think it was like Franchise Studios, was just like, we're gonna just only finance movies for actors' passion projects, and no one expected that movie to make any money at all, and it bombed as it should have, and it wasn't very successful, and no one saw it. Like, I don't necessarily think of that as a bomb just because it came out and didn't make money. Like, no one would have said that it would.
Yeah.
I think a bomb to me is more of something that a studio puts a lot of money into, you think it's going to be a hit, and then it fails, and no one thought that.
But the problem was they still, even though everyone knew it was a bad idea, they still put a huge budget on it at the time. So it was like that's part of why I was including it. Because if they put a small budget on it and it made like a little money and it was just a story because of how bad it was, but then it probably wouldn't have worked. But I think because it was a big budget movie for whatever reason, kind of it fits the bill.
Yeah, that was my thought process for not picking it for the most part. But yeah, and same with Waterworld. I think basically broke even by the end of the day, excluding probably marketing. So I didn't pick that too, even though I know that one had a wild budget of like over $200 million.
Yeah, it was the biggest budget on a movie for a long time. It was more the story. For some of the Mount Rushmore picks, I went with like the story behind it type of deal because of just for a different reason. But I can see that not making it.
Yeah, and Spinner58 said in the comments that they see a blockbuster as a movie that every kid thinks he needs to see with his friends, which I feel like kind of fits what.
Also, Citizen Kane sucked, and people got to stop pretending it's good.
I like it. But next up, we have Tristan kicking us off with blockbuster characters.
I'm excited for this category.
For first character, I think I have a staple of blockbuster franchises. We kind of debated whether or not these movies count as summer or not at the beginning before the episode, but it's James Bond. I think whether or not technically he's a summer blockbuster, I think he has enough to qualify, and I think every like suave, cool guy, like even John Wick, is inspired by James Bond, and I think all of those kind of cool guy, smooth talking, hot guy characters are all trying to be James Bond. So I think that's kind of why I gave that spot to Bond. My second is one that I think people are also trying to emulate really hard, and that's John McClane. I think every wisecracking like real guy in the wrong situation kind of character we see, whether it's in a Die Hard ripoff, whether it's in like a totally different genre, like just a guy throwing off his rocker and he's trying to be wisecracking. He's not like the other cops, he's swearing, he's kind of cool. I think John McClane fits that mold really well, so that's my pick. My third spot, I wanted to go for a female character, and I think one that was really inspirational, aspirational for women, and led a huge franchise throughout my childhood, and I think all of our childhoods, is Hermione Granger. I think that was a huge character, and I think we've seen that character tried to be emulated in a lot of characters recently, but everyone knows Hermione. I think she's probably the most iconic, interesting character of a franchise that's not even named after her. So that's my third choice. And my last is one that I think, without this particular character, you don't get the MCU. We talked about Iron Man as like an unexpected hit, but I think Tony Stark, the character, is the big reason we have that movie as a hit. I think the fact that he was so likable and so charming is why the movie did so well, and it's why people wanted to see more of him. Because people wanted to see more of the MCU because they wanted more Iron Man. I remember people were watching Avengers like, oh, where's Tony Stark going to come up? So I think without Tony Stark, the MCU doesn't work. So that's my last bet. I'm giving it to Tony Stark. So those are my 4 picks.
All right, Johnny, you're up.
I'm up. Are you
Oh
up?
wait, no, I'm up. My bad. I should.
I was like, wait, are we skipping Joe?
I don't know where anyone else is. Tristan's invisible. Bobby's gone. Everything's chaos. So, for my first one, I have kind of what I think of as almost like the quintessential box office or summer blockbuster character, and I went with Indiana Jones. Kicked off a franchise. It's played by the same actor, obviously, as Han Solo, but I feel like it stands on its own and its own character. Next up, I have Marty McFly, who I feel like, as far as a franchise lead, stands apart from a lot of these other summer franchises, which are these older, more muscular kind of characters, where he's kind of like this everyman type thing, where they somehow figured out how to make a character that seems like a jock, but he's also nerdy. I feel like pretty much anyone can identify with Marty McFly. Next up, I have Michael Keaton's Batman, who I think, without that character and the portrayal of that character, I don't know if we have like the superhero kind of boom that we have right now. And I think part of that is Michael Keaton's Batman. So influential that they're bringing him back for the Flash movie to reprise the role. And then for my fourth one, I wanted to do something different, so I went with an animated character, and I went with Shrek, who I feel like is super popular character, still relevant today, and is almost like stands alone, separate from their film franchise. And so those are my four picks: Indiana Jones, Marty McFly, Michael Keaton's Batman, and Shrek.
All right. Interesting. I wouldn't have thought Shrek. I like that choice. I have some commonality with what has been mentioned so far. I also have James Bond because while, if you look at the franchise now and you say, okay, there's 24 movies, 10 of them were released in the summer. Yes, but once it hit the 90s, they decided to go more towards November, October. The 10 movies of the first 14 were all summer. That was the epitome of the summer blockbuster movie before the MCU, before Mission Impossible, before Fast and Furious, before any of these big franchises. That was the summer blockbuster franchise. So I think James Bond definitely deserves a spot. Indiana Jones, I agree with Joe on that one. Yeah, all of his movies are released in the summer. It's played by the same actor. It's very iconic. I also went with, I didn't specify which one because all of the movies have basically been summer movies. I said Batman. You can go Christian Bale there. You can go Michael Keaton there. You can go Ben Affleck. I advise against it, but you can. Pretty much all those are summer movies, and Batman's in those. And for my fourth pick, I went with my favorite character of all time in any movie. The best character in the first summer blockbuster of all time, I went with Quint, played by Robert Shaw in Jaws. If we're going characters, I don't need to see him in multiple movies if he makes that big of an impact. He's in the first Jaws. All you need to see him is in, screen time wise, he's probably not in it very much. But for the Indianapolis speech alone, calling everybody chief, great character, super memorable. I think you could argue that he is just as memorable, if not more memorable, than any of the other characters on any of our lists, and he only appears in one movie compared to some that we have in multiple franchises. So that's why I wanted to represent a character that was only in one that was memorable compared to the rest of my list are guys that are franchises. So those are my four.
Yeah, he does make an appearance in another movie.
No, he doesn't.
Master guys. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, Bobby tried to pitch a serious movie with that same character.
All right. Well, my list is not going to be. My list isn't going to be super interesting because I do have three that are commonalities, but I do have one that is different. I'll start with my commonalities. I have Bruce Wayne / Batman. I mean, like Johnny said, almost all of his movies have been in the summer. It could be any actor. It's been a constant ever since 1989. There's usually a Batman franchise going on. I also have Indiana Jones. I think that is, as much as I love Han Solo, that is Harrison Ford's standout. Like, that is his role, and he is an Indiana Jones. And those movies are like the typical what you think of for a summer blockbuster with the adventure kind of style and those stories that are just like one-off like adventures that this character can go on. I also have Tony Stark, Iron Man, because of the more modern MCU and kind of starting off like I've said before, one of the biggest franchises or the biggest going on right now. And then the last one that I have is similar to Johnny's Quint pick in that it's someone from only one movie that makes a huge impact, and it's a movie that sticks around and everyone still talks about the character and the actor, and that is Hans Gruber from Die Hard. I think it is. I like having a villain represented for the summer blockbuster characters, and Hans Gruber for his single appearance is one of the most iconic villains of all time, including his death scene, his unique voice. The first time we ever heard Alan Rickman. And I think he just stands out as one of the best villains in an summer action movie ever. So there's my 4: Bruce Wayne, Indiana Jones, Tony Stark, and Hans Gruber.
All right, so we have 4 that are on multiple lists. We could go with those 4. We could switch them out. So we have Indiana Jones is on 3, Batman is on 3, James Bond is on 2, and Tony Stark is on 2. Is everyone good with those 4? Or is there any we want to switch out and change around? Or
My only argument to switching out for Hermione is to get a female character on the list, but that's worth it.
My only argument against Hermione is I don't know fully all of the release dates, but I always thought those were more like November, yeah. Christmas-y.
They
releases.
They were Christmas time. I don't know if any of them came out in the summer. But right. I do love Hermione.
I mean, the I know at least Deathly Hallows Part 2 did and was one of the biggest hits of that summer, but yeah, for the most part, I don't think of that franchise as a summer movie.
Yeah. It's like the Lord of the Rings stuff. It was like Christmas time.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, the reason that I didn't put Tony Stark on my list is because I think he's the same thing as like all the Star Wars characters. While you do have memorable people in it, you just have so many to choose from. I do think if you were to pick a standout from the MCU, he's got to be it though. Yeah. So that's the only reason I didn't pick him, but I knew he would be on multiple lists. So I think that's a strong 4 of very solid characters, and all of them appeared in multiple films.
Yeah. All right. And before we read off the list, Mr. Moist Mason wants to know why we have Tony Stark over Dominic Toretto.
He'll come up later. Don't worry.
Because he's a good character.
Yeah. Because Dominic Toretto is like the worst character in those movies. Yeah. I would have went with any of the other characters.
All right.
Fast and Furious over him.
All right. So our 4 Mount Rushmore picks for characters in summer blockbusters, we have Indiana Jones, Batman, James Bond, and Tony Stark. So
I'm super excited for the next category.
All right. And then our next category, we have actors in summer blockbusters, and I'm kicking that off. And I remember what my change was. I made a last minute change because I remembered some things. So first off, to kick this off, a character or a person we just recently talked about, I have Harrison Ford. One of his characters made our Mount Rushmore of summer blockbuster characters. He also played Han Solo, and then there were some other kind of one-off roles like Air Force One. And so Harrison Ford made my list. And then I also have Tom Cruise, who basically made my list for ushering and kind of bringing us the Mission Impossible franchise and leading that franchise. And I feel like it's the best action franchise going right now, and maybe of all time. And then I also have Will Smith, who basically dominated the 90s as far as summer blockbusters. There was a time basically up until Wild Wild West, he was known as Mr. July 4th because he had a new movie every July 4th weekend, and it was kind of always one of the big hits of the summer. And then finally I have, kind of in an age where the movie star doesn't exist anymore, a guy who basically can release anything in theaters and it'll be a big hit, and that's Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson for my final and 4th pick of my Mount Rushmore summer blockbuster actors.
Yeah, I'm excited for this category because I think there's 3 of them that are going to be obvious, and then I think the 4th spot is going to be where we come to debate on. So, like Joe, I have Harrison Ford, but I think the most obvious choice here is Tom Cruise. Just based on my account alone, he's been in 11 different summer blockbuster movies. I believe it's 4 Mission Impossible movies that were released in the summer: Top Gun, Risky Business, Days of Thunder, Minority Report, Collateral, War of the Worlds, Tropic Thunder. All of those were released in the summer, and those are just the big ones that he's done. So I think that's a without a doubt. I also went with Will Smith because he did, obviously, Independence Day, both Men in Black, all 3 I think Men in Black movies that he was in, I Robot, both like all the Bad Boys movies. He's been in a ton of summer blockbusters. So I think those three, it's
Suicide
not a
Squad.
debate on. Um, yes, Suicide Squad. And then
Great movie.
I think my last one I will argue for because everyone knows at this point my love of James Bond, and I think people don't give Roger Moore the credit that he deserves. And we talked about how 10 of the, James Bond movies were released in the summer. Roger Moore did Live and Let Die, which was June of 73. He did The Spy Who Loved Me, which was June of 77. Moonraker, which was June of 79. For Your Eyes Only, and Cannonball Run in 1981, which were both huge hits. Cannonball Run made like $160 million. And then he did Octopussy and A View to a Kill, both in 83 and 85 in the summer as well. So when James Bond was dominating the summers, it was Roger Moore as James Bond, and he also has another movie in there with Cannonball Run that made a ton of money and was a huge hit. So I wanted to find at least one if he, did it outside of his franchise, and he did. He was a bigger star than people remember him being, and I think he deserves a spot on the list because, like Joe said with Harrison Ford, he already has a character that's on the Mount Rushmore. And while most of his big hits were that character, he also went outside of it for at least one huge hit, as well as some other ones that maybe weren't as memorable for being, big hits, but popular movies. So my four then are Harrison Ford, Tom Cruise, Will Smith, and Roger Moore.
All right, Bobby, what do you got for your 4 picks?
This might be a quick one because I have all three commonalities of what Johnny just had with Joe. So Harrison Ford, Will Smith, Tom Cruise. Those were like, I think, gimmies in my mind. Will Smith, I was actually debating, but I mean, he defined when we were growing up. He was the movie star. Every movie of his was a big hit that we needed to go see. And Harrison Ford, obviously, multiple characters, multiple movies. And Tom Cruise he's just, Mission Impossible and everything else Johnny mentioned. My fourth one is someone who is definitely a pop culture icon for his physique, for his voice, for all the kind of the era of movies he's in, from action to comedy, and that's Arnold Schwarzenegger. Even in movies that are bad, I enjoy watching him, even if he is giving a bad performance, like in Batman and Robin. I just find him entertaining, and I even liked him in the Terminator Genesis, which is not a good movie, but he's the best part of that one. But he defined an era of kind of the muscle-bound action star, and then he kind of branched off and did a lot of comedies and type of stuff throughout the 90s and that. He was in one of the biggest blockbusters of all time for years, which was T2. And so I think that he kind of defines an era, him and Sly, and I went with Arnold over him. So there's my four.
All right, and Tristan, what are your 4 picks?
All right, Tristan.
I have two that were already brought up, so I'm gonna knock them off really quick. I think Tom Cruise, the modern action star, he can draw people in to see anything he wants, and he's very much like involved as a producer. So I think that's very important too. Like he's not just going there and saying the lines. I feel like The Rock sometimes does that. He just goes there and says the lines. Tom Cruise is very much involved in the production and involved in the effects and the stunts and all that kind of stuff. The second one is Harrison Ford. I think in creating iconic characters, and you can go back and watch him, and he's like a pleasure to watch. I think people overlook Harrison Ford as an actor sometimes. They're like, oh, he's just like the gruff guy who does the Han Solo lines. But I think he's given some really great performances, so I think he's a great actor to have on the list here. And then I have two that I haven't gotten brought up yet. The first I'm going to mention is one that might not always be the lead, but he has led a lot of movies, and he's popped up in I couldn't even count the amount of blockbusters, and that's Samuel L. Jackson. You got Star Wars, you got Marvel, you got Die Hard, you got Pulp Fiction. He's all over the map. Pulp Fiction was that huge indie blockbuster hit. No one really thought Pulp Fiction was going to be anything, and then he kind of relaunched his career with that. And of course, he's the supporting role of Marvel and Star Wars, and even in movies like Hitman's Bodyguard, like he does these B-level blockbusters that people go see and they make money, and that's kind of just like they go see him. He's the appeal, so I have him there on my spot. In my last, I wanted to cover what I consider to be a blockbuster actor, not necessarily from America and American movies, and that's Jackie Chan. He has some huge hits like Police Story that were huge hits in his home country, but he's also had some domestic hits. We want to call him a blockbusters, only like Hollywood movies, and you could say like Kung Fu Panda, an animated huge blockbuster hit. Rush Hour was a huge blockbuster hit. So I think he has that cross appeal of multiple countries and also goes through multiple genres like action and comedy. And I think he also is someone that is very involved in his own stunts. And you look at Police Story, some of the most effective practical stunts in a movie. So I think he's kind of like a Tom Cruise of a different generation, of a different country. So I wanted to give him some love on my list here.
All right. So that's your 4, right? Yeah. So we have 3 that I think are locked in: Harrison Ford, Tom Cruise, and Will Smith. And we're looking for that 4th option. And for me, if I were to place my vote, and I think the audience agrees with me, is for that 4th option is Samuel L. Jackson.
I agree too. Yep.
Shout out to Sam Jackson. I love him. I didn't think of him because I didn't pick him because he's not ever the lead of those movies, but I think that still deserves a place of being in as many as he's in.
Yeah. So is that
Yeah.
what we're going
And-
for with those 4? Does anyone have anything else they want to add? Or
I like that.
Shout
I
out
was
to
going to
Roger
say,
Moore.
what?
yeah. And Arnold's always fun, but I would rather have Sam Jackson on the list.
Roger Moore.
I wanna.
What?
You go first.
No, you say something. I was just had a finishing up that.
I just wanted to add that I didn't realize you're gender specificing this list, so my 4th one was Marilyn Monroe, but I switched her out for Harrison Ford.
Oh, I didn't realize it was gender specific. I just think Hollywood's
It
sexist.
wasn't.
It wasn't.
Yeah, Hollywood's
Oh.
sexist, so
Yeah.
Well,
there weren't a whole lot of
Marilyn Monroe.
options. But
I just that's the problem when you look at like all of these lists, and I was just like, there's not many women characters that fall into summer blockbuster categories. If you take out, even if you look at the superhero movies, like in a few years you could argue maybe Wonder Woman, but she hasn't done enough, and you don't really have a lot of that.
I
Which
originally
is a
had
problem for sure.
I originally had Zoe Saldana because of the fact that she's in Avatar and the MCU and Star Trek and Pirates of the Caribbean, but then I remembered Avatar came out in December, so that doesn't really count. And I think Samuel L. Jackson kind of fills that similar type thing of, a person that's kind of the background in all of these franchises. So, and one thing I was going to say is Roger Moore was going to be my vote because I like the idea of the guy who is kind of known for just like really one franchise and dominated an era. But with that being said, our Mount Rushmore of summer blockbuster actors are Harrison Ford, Thomas Cruise Mapother IV, Will Smith, and Samuel L. Jackson.
All right, I like it.
Which brings us to summer blockbuster franchises, and I believe Johnny is kicking that off.
All right. Franchises. This was maybe a tougher one than expected going into it, but I think I'm going to settle on. I have 6, but I'm going to settle on 4. I'm going to go. You can't really argue it. Star Wars. It was started off. It was a huge one, and now they've kind of moved their release dates to December. But the first 6 movies were all summer release dates.
And Solo,
I think.
Plus Solo.
And no one cares about Solo. That one doesn't count. That one maybe hurts the argument. Maybe I'll take it off the list.
And probably Clone Wars also. So
who knows?
I think that
While you can argue that there are maybe only 3 good Star Wars movies released in the summer, a lot of them are, and they all make money. So you got to go with that franchise. I'm sticking to it. I'm going with James Bond. That was the summer blockbuster franchise up until the 90s when they decided to change it to more of a November release. I do still think some of the later movies had summer releases in like the UK and some other countries. But yeah, for the most part in the US, they kind of shifted it. But yeah, for a long time, that was the summer blockbuster franchise. I also went with Indiana Jones. He's on our Mount Rushmore as a character. Harrison Ford's on there as an actor. Indiana Jones is very summer. If they were to release the next Indiana Jones movie and it was in December, it would feel weird because that just feels like a summer type of a movie, even to just watch it and stuff. And then I had a tough time with my 4th category. I was debating on Mission Impossible. Not all of them have come out in the summer, but the ones that have been big hits. But I didn't go with that. And I was debating on Jaws just because while the sequels aren't very good, that franchise as a whole might deserve some love just for the first one. But then I had to go with I don't know if you can specifically call it a franchise, but the MCU, if you want to narrow it down, the Avengers movies specifically. So I think that those four are pretty solid. They're some of the biggest franchises in the world and in the history of cinema. And when I think summer blockbusters, all of those really kind of define what that is to me. They're all big budget, big action movies, adventure movies, and I think that kind of is what it is. So Star Wars, James Bond, Indiana Jones, and the Avengers slash MCU for me.
All right, Bobby, what do you got for your picks?
Very similar to Johnny, and I think that some of these are definitely going to be kind of clearly on multiple lists. Star Wars, I think that's a gimme. Really no need to go into it. I had the MCU slash Avengers, so that's what I did as well. I said, like, if you don't want to count just the MCU, you can put the Avengers movies in there. I also had Indiana Jones. He's popped up on every single like list that he is available in this, and I think that it just kind of defines summer blockbuster. And then the last one I have is a franchise that I'm not a fan of, but I'm more interested in the story surrounding it and kind of how it became what it is, and that is the Fast and Furious, which is like the modern action. It started out as just car racing, point break rip off, and it wasn't even a big hit really until the fifth movie, when it started making crazy money, and then 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, like out of all those, I think 4 of them made $1 billion, and it's just become a crazy weird franchise with dumb names, and I think it fits the bill as it's just no other franchise has done that, where it started out as an okay hit and was fading, and then all of a sudden in the fifth movie comes in and becomes a blockbuster franchise. So not a fan of the movies, but I like the story. So I have Star Wars, the MCU, Indiana Jones, and Fast and Furious.
It's all about family. That's what.
Oh, yeah. Family. And Corona.
Yeah.
All right, Tristan, what do you got for your picks?
I'll cover the couple that I got mentioned before. Of course, Star Wars is going to be on the list. It's Star Wars. It's the ultimate, from a nothing movie to the massive IP that dominates the entire world. And, it's Star Wars. I can't not put it on the list. Got a tattoo right here in my arm. The second I had that also got brought up is Bond. I think when you're talking about long-running franchises, you're talking about, the escalation from just a spy movie to, the ridiculous craziness and then back down to a spy movie. I think Bond is, the identity of what a franchise really can be. Then I want to shout out Bobby for picking the great American franchise, the ultimate American action franchise that will come to define cinema, I think, throughout the future of this decade. The ultimate balls to the wall franchise, Fast and the Furious. Bobby mentioned the craziness of going from a racing franchise to an action franchise, and it didn't happen overnight. It's a gradual kind of thing. It starts off as a really grounded kind of racing thriller movie, and then it goes up and up and up and up and up. And watching that growth over the course of the last, I didn't watch them all at once. I've watched them all over the course last week or so. But yeah, I'm really into it. So that's my pick for Fast and Furious as my third franchise. And my last one, I'm making a final pitch here. If you're talking long-running franchise, you're talking franchises that are designed purely to make money, purely to have people come to the theaters, see it opening weekend, and then kind of leave and not see it again. You got to cover a horror movie. So I'm making my last pitch here for Friday the 13th. It created kind of the slasher genre as it is. We had Halloween, we had Psycho, but you didn't have the gore fest, just go kill the teenagers and then that's the whole movie. That's what Friday the 13th created, and I think those still make money now. People go out to the theater to see The Conjuring and to see these movies that it's here's a one center icon killer that's going to take out all the kids, and it's just going to be the entire genre was created by Friday the 13th. And we're talking about Jason goes to space, Jason goes to Manhattan, Jason meets this character and this guy from real life, and Busta Rhymes is in this one. I think when you talk about a franchise just kind of going off the rails but still managing to make money and inspire a fan base, that's my pick for Friday the 13th. So those are my 4. I've got a couple that got brought up, but I also wanted to mention Fast and Furious, of course, the ultimate movie franchise, and Friday the 13th, I think, is the ultimate horror franchise.
I gotta say, Busta Rhymes is in one of the Halloween movies. I don't think he's in one of the Friday the 13th movies.
You're right. I got my streams crossed there.
Yep.
All right, so that brings me to my list. All but one of mine have been brought up before. Obviously, I went with the MCU. We're 22, 23, however many movies deep, and I feel like it's the most popular film franchise of all time. They're pretty much all summer releases. So I had to go with that. Obviously, I had to go with Star Wars as well. It kind of kicked off what the summer blockbuster franchise is. And then I went with Indiana Jones as well because, again, it's one of those first summer blockbuster franchise. It's iconic. They're still making a fifth one for some reason. No idea how that's going to go. And then finally, for my fourth pick, I went with Mission Impossible. I feel like it's the best action franchise of all time. Maybe other franchises have, better individual movies, but I can't imagine a franchise that's 6 movies in and people could list any of the 6 as their favorite. And
except for the second
even
one.
2.
the second one's not even like bad. It's just like
It's weird.
It's just like whatever about it. But okay, outside of that, 5 of the movies you can argue are great, and people still can argue which one their best one is. So I would say Mission Impossible. So, and yeah, those are my 4: MCU, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and Mission Impossible. So with that being said, we have, I think, 3 that are locked in with Star Wars, MCU, and Indiana Jones. And then we have 2 franchises that were on only 2 lists, and that's James Bond and The Fast and the Furious.
So we have a debate on Fast and Furious or James Bond.
Johnny, or Bobby, you had it on both lists, right?
No,
Tristan did.
I had it on both lists.
Okay.
The reason
Tristan had both.
I left off James Bond because a majority of the movies, especially now, are not summer. So I didn't, and I thought even less of them were summer when I was making the list. So I had just Fast and Furious out of those 2.
All right, and Mr. Moist Mason says in the chat, "Go with Jackass, you cowards." So
they are in the middle of production on the 4th one.
They just released the trailer this
Jackass
morning for the
4
4th one, or maybe it was yesterday. And so Spinner58 says, "I vote Bond," and Mr. Moist Mason said Fast and Furious for sure. So I feel like
we're 50-50.
So me, who didn't have Bond or Fast and Furious on either list, and Tristan, who had it on both, I feel like are the most unbiased as which one it would go between. I know where I'm leaning. Tristan, would you have a preference for which one would make the overall list?
I could tell where Tristan's leaning.
Look, I know where I'm leaning. I'm leaning towards the Johnny Sucks route here because I'm going with Fast and Furious. I think it's definitely close. I think Bond has like the iconography of it, like the long running element of it. But I think just in terms of modern day franchises, just like the complete balls to the wall craziness of Fast and Furious, I think is like the embodiment of like empty blockbuster Hollywood movies that are somehow kind of like fun and endearing. So I think for me that's my pick.
Yeah, here's my defense for Bond. First of all, Fast and Furious, whatever, like they're dumb movies that people have fun with. They're not good. But that being said, I understand that being on the list. That was my 5th. That was in my list of movies that I didn't pick originally. But my argument for it is this. Joe had Mission Impossible on his list. We all have Indiana Jones for the most part on our list. You don't have either of those characters. You don't have either of those franchises if you don't have James Bond. They even brought in Sean Connery for The Last Crusade as an homage to the character of Bond. James Bond is the reason that most of these franchises exist as they are. You're talking about modern franchises. The MCU encapsulates the modern franchises much more than Fast and Furious does. Fast and Furious, like Bobby said, didn't even start being a franchise really until the 5th movie. James Bond was the biggest hit in the world up until, it still kind of is. It kind of died in the early 2000s and stuff with Die Another Day, but that is, when I think summer blockbusters, I know people coined the term for Jaws, but if you look at a summer blockbuster franchise, James Bond is the original. James Bond is the original summer blockbuster franchise. It's still, it went on doing that until the 90s, and now it's moved its spot a little bit, and it's not so much that. But from 1962 until 1989, for a 20-year span, that is the summer blockbuster franchise. You can't say the same about Fast and Furious. Like, yeah, it has 10 years in a run of being dumb fun movies every year and a half basically, but it's not in the same stratosphere as James Bond, and will never have the impact that the franchise had on other movies. There's no movies coming out today that you can credit Fast and Furious for inspiring, and we have two franchises that could, Indiana Jones will make this list, and Mission Impossible could have been an argument. That was another one on my list. You don't have those franchises without James Bond. You can't point to anything else and say Fast and Furious is the reason for this unless it's a failed movie like Need for Speed.
The movies.
The movies.
Bobby, do you have a vote of what you would pick between these two? After Johnny.
I mean, honestly, look, I like the James Bond franchise way more than I like the Fast and Furious franchise. And if I were to replace Fast and Furious with anything on these lists, it would be probably Mission Impossible for a similar story where, it kind of picked itself back up and became a franchise years after like the first two came out, and kind of deal. But I think it's Fast and Furious for like I don't know how it's doing what it's doing. It's just it's crazy, dumb, fun action that I don't find that entertaining. That a lot of people end up
it's
watching
doing what it's doing
so.
Because there's not any dialogue you need to pay attention to, and it has action scenes that are popular in China. Like the whole reason Fast and Furious is popular is because people who don't speak English can watch it and have fun with it. But the movies are very good. The only decent one is Hobbs and Shaw, and that was and it was a spin-off.
I want to betray myself slightly and say that I'm leaning a bit more towards Bond now. I think Johnny made a good
I will
point when
say
he said that we have the MCU already to cover like the schlocky modern day franchise. So I think Bond has that like long running, decades long franchise. So I'm going there instead.
I will say though, my argument against what Johnny was saying was kind of like the points he was bringing up of if we were arguing a top, right? Like his points are all valid and I would agree with him. But as far as like the Mount Rushmore, I almost feel like Indiana Jones and James Bond are, because of the inspiration that Indiana Jones took from James Bond, they're almost kind of representations of the same thing. So it would almost be.
But the Fast and Furious, the whole reason that they make money now is because they turned them into superhero movies because they saw the success of the MCU. So you can say the same thing for MCU and Fast and Furious. And I think James Bond and Indiana Jones are far more Mount Rushmore worthy than either the MCU or Fast and Furious. So I think that'd be my argument there.
All right.
So what's that? We go James Bond?
Yeah, I'm leaning towards Bond unless Bobby has a massive argument against it.
No, because honestly, I like the franchise more. I just find the Fast and Furious movies like kind of
we already have.
It's definitely more of a modern day summer blockbuster, but I think if you look at the franchises as a whole,
right,
you can still define like the first 20 years of Bond as that summer blockbuster.
I think if you're going through Bond, you can find like a handful of genuinely really great movies, like great spy thriller movies, like, and then in Fast and Furious, you're like, there's a couple that are like dumb entertainment, but there's nothing that's going to be like a long time forever movie.
Yeah, and I figure,
and the whole reason that I love James Bond so much is because if you go through the years, and what it still does is James Bond takes what is the big thing now and then makes a movie that's like that. So there's no other franchise that encapsulates. Yeah, Star Wars gets big, so they do Moonraker. You have all of these Die Hard and 80s action movies and Scarface, so they do License to Kill. You have these big early 2000s and late 90s like crazy movies, so you do Die Another Day, and then you have to reboot the franchise, so you go Bourne, and then the fault of it is sometimes you get a Spectre where it's like, well, we have to connect everything and make one universe because of the MCU, and then it kind of fails. But I like it for its failure and for its things. But you can't find another franchise that has a spy movie, a blaxploitation movie, a space movie, a genuine spy thriller, and like just kind of crazy action movies thrown in there. So I think it encapsulates everything that summer blockbusters ever have been.
Yeah,
you're not gonna. It doesn't take too much to get Bond to go over Fast and Furious for me, so that's fine.
And also for me,
you tried to choose Fast and Furious.
Because the span of movies that really would have been the summer blockbusters aren't my favorite span of Bond movies, the Roger Moore ones, which are some I really like and some I think are kind of schlocky and not quite as good.
I agree.
But so for the span of time that it was in the summer, it's comparable in nature to Fast and Furious, at least, where it's kind of the more corny, on the more corny side, but I still like them. They're still great.
Yeah. And I will say, like in Fast and Furious, you're getting like the 25 movies worth of Bond escalation in like a 5-movie span. Like you're going from the really low.
Yeah, it's wild. They're going into space in like the 7th or like the 9th movie.
Yeah.
I don't know. And the ninth movie that's come out in like 10 years, it feels like.
First one was 2001, so
20 years.
That's wild.
Yeah, it started
20
off
I mean,
with
I
them
don't
stealing
count
TV
anything
VCR
before the fifth one.
combos.
But shout out though to I don't know if he's Hobbs or Shaw, but Jason Statham. I just watched Wrath
Shaw.
of Man
I
last
believe
night.
he's Shaw.
Yeah, that makes more sense. That makes sense.
I haven't
But
seen
yeah, I
that
watched
one.
Wrath of Man last night. I highly recommend it. That's a great movie. I watched Pig in theaters, came home and watched Wrath of Man. It was a good night for movies.
All right, so I think that wraps up our franchise Mount Rushmore. We have Star Wars, the MCU, Indiana Jones, and James Bond, which I feel like are four worthy Mount Rushmore category, or four worthy Mount Rushmore members. So that wraps up our show for today as far as our Mount Rushmore. We can go around the room, talk about any picks, anything we're surprised didn't make an overall Mount Rushmore, anything we were glad did. Johnny, any comments about today's episode?
I mean, I'm happy about the James Bond making it on the end there. I fought hard for it. The one that I mentioned and then kind of forgot I even said, and I would have put more of a fight for the unexpected blockbusters. I liked representing Jurassic World as far as one that you knew might make some money, but no one expected it to make as much money as it did. That's different than I think anything else we mentioned for that. Most of them were, it was a low budget or, kind of not that big genre and it just kind of blew up. But I still to this day do not know how Jurassic World made as much money as it did. Props to that franchise, but wow, that was, I remember seeing that opening weekend and just being shocked because we went to see that movie and being like, it was fun. Like, it's better than the sequels, but the movie itself wasn't great. It has a lot of really dumb moments. And then it just was such a massive hit.
Yeah.
It was crazy. And then I feel like Fallen Kingdom erased like any bit of momentum that franchise had going for it, like the next movie, but that was to be expected.
All right, and Bobby, same question.
The only one that I kind of wished would get on the list, but with what we chose, I don't know where it would be, is Hans Gruber, just to get a villain and like the iconic single performance on there. But I'm pretty happy with most of them. I mean, I think we were in common on a lot of picks that I like Indiana Jones and Star Wars and Avengers and all that type of stuff. So it's still always fun to hear all the different picks. Like I loved hearing even just Blair Witch, which did make it, was a cool pick that I didn't think of.
Yeah.
And even like Friday the 13th is something I wouldn't have thought of because for one thing, I just instantly think most horror franchises come out in October. So I didn't even think about that, but I looked it up and all of those are pretty much summer releases. So that does count, but yeah, no, fun episode. I like doing these. It's a lot less stressful than doing the pitches against one another and getting a little bit more heated. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the next time we do this.
All right, Tristan, and how upset are you that Friday the 13th got no representation on our Mount Rushmore?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty mad. We went for a lot of the traditional, like, action kind of blockbusters. I was hoping for some outside stuff, like you get the horror movie representation, that kind of thing. But, we didn't go for it this time. I guess got to push harder next time. But, yeah, it was a good episode. This is a lot less stressful. I don't sit here and spend a week with anxiety over my pitches being bad, and I just get to come in and talk about movies. It's a good way to do it. If you're watching blockbuster movies, me and Joe recently reviewed Black Widow, so you can find that on the YouTube channel. It was all right. Probably won't make a Mount Rushmore anytime soon, but
Mount Rushmore of
check out our
solidly
review if you
okay
want.
MCU movies.
I would say this though, just before I forget, mentioning off Tristan's point of, first of all, wait till October when we get to do horror movie Mount Rushmore. So I think that will be exciting. I think we're going to try to do this monthly and have different categories. Would be fun. I like these episodes, and anyone watching or who watches this and either knows us personally or wants to message us on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or anything, and you have suggestions for themed Mount Rushmores or categories or anything of that, let us know what you guys want to see, because we like doing these episodes like we said, and it's a nice break in between fighting with each other. So anyone who wants to see specific things, maybe Mason wants an all Fast and Furious episode, we probably won't do that, but
That would be hard.
if
I'm
you're
down for it.
Mount Rushmore of family of
yeah,
lines.
we'd have to get Michael on that episode and have a family episode.
Yeah, 100%.
Even though I don't think any of us are big Fast and Furious fans. I know you and I
Definitely
aren't, but I doubt Michael is too. So.
All right,
And we had Joe's mom in here.
And one thing I wanted to say was I'm happy I got Blair Witch Project on the overall Mount Rushmore. I was kind of a late edition one that I was looking up when I was looking up unexpected movies, and then I just started to look at low budget movies that succeeded. And when I would have assumed that Blair Witch Project was like a September, October release, but when I saw it was released in like mid-July, I was like, oh shit, definitely got to put that on the list for unexpected hits. And some housekeeping things. Tristan and I are going to stream our Disney Plus weekly review Friday at 7 o'clock here, I think, unless he works at that time, but then we'll stream it later on YouTube. Basically, if you have Disney Plus and you're like, I have it, I don't really know what to watch, we kind of review all of the big drops that week on Disney Plus. This week we're reviewing the most recent episode of Bad Batch. There's a documentary about the behind the scenes of Loki that we're going to review. We also have a show called Behind the Attraction, which kind of talks about various attractions at Disney World. And we're also going to review the premiere episode of Turner and Hooch starring Josh Peck. So that is...
What?
I forgot about that.
I just
exists?
I just watched the premiere episode about 10 minutes before this started. So watch our Disney Plus review to see our review of the Turner and Hooch, or the premiere episode of the Turner and Hooch show.
Starring the non-sexual predator.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah, I was about to bring that up.
Also, one of the things we've been wanting to do, number one, to help us like market the show, is have more like themed months. So with we're kind of going to wrap up this month. Next week we have the championship match between Bobby and Johnny. And then the month after that, because Suicide Squad comes out on HBO Max and in theaters the first week of September, or August, the first week of August. August is going to be kind of our ensemble movies month, where we'll do either Mount Rushmore or Hall of Fame that relate to ensemble movies. Our fight at the end of the month, that's our normal main episode, will be kind of ensemble movie themed. And then in September, to build up to James Bond releasing, I think, October 8th, September is going to be James Bond month. So kind of with this, we're going to probably do... Me and Tristan are going head-to-head in a James Bond match. We'll probably do like another Mount Rushmore or Hall of Fame, something with James Bond. So yeah, check that out. That's kind of what we're going towards. And because of the length of our main show, our championship matches will still be 7 movies apiece, but we've all decided to cut down on our episode length. We're going down to 5 pitches per match instead of 7. So, because we keep trying new things to get down to like 2 hours, 2 hours and 15 minutes, somewhere in there. No matter what we do, it always winds up being like 2.5 hours. So we've decided that 5 matches 5 pitches instead of 7 will be the best route to go. And unless anyone else has anything to say, I'm gonna end it here.
Johnny sucks.
Johnny does suck. Have a nice night.